I wanted to sort of start the day with actually a little bit of an admission, okay? My first thing I wanted to say is that I'm absolutely crap at tennis, all right? So a couple of years ago, I actually decided, just for fitness purposes, I joined the Sorrento Tennis Club, okay? Playing predominantly retirees. I found every weekend I was getting absolutely licked, and I couldn't understand why. You know, I was driving the ball hard, I was trying some trick shots, and these old retirees were just absolutely caning me on the scoreboard. So one day I was licking my wounds, and this smug retiree came up to me, and as they do, they hand you books. And they handed me this book called Extraordinary Tennis for the Ordinary Player. And I thought that was pretty apt for me because, you know, and I actually read the thing, which was quite surprising. And what I found quite wonderful about this book is this guy called Simon Ramo. He actually he was a crap player as well. And he actually looked at the game of tennis from the side of being a statistician. He wasn't a tennis player, he was a statistician. So what he did was, firstly, he went out and he followed the tennis players that were making excellent shots. And he tallied up the excellent shots. And what he actually found was that those excellent shots, or the role of the winner, didn't have any effect on the game at all, on the outcome. What he actually found was the person in control of the game, whether you won or you lost, was actually the loser. So what he did was he actually described tennis as being the ultimate loser's game, okay? Because it was the loser that had the full control of the outcome. And basically, what he found was that it was a game where whoever made the fewer mistakes won, okay? It wasn't about whoever had the best shot or made the best plays. It was actually the person who sequentially made fewer mistakes. And that's the reason why all these retirees were absolutely licking me, because they were focusing on just getting the ball back, and I was trying to get the ball back to them in style, all right? And it really, really wasn't working. So this is weed control in a nutshell. This is the Weed Smart Big Six. And you'll see that when we think about weed control, it's actually not just about tools or tactics. Okay, it's about a system. It's about the way we put things together. So, you know, we have rotate crops and pastures. We have to select the right herbicide, and we have to use that herbicide well. We have to mix and rotate what we're using so we don't develop resistance. As we spoke about earlier, we need to stop seed set, and we need to implement harvest weed seed control. Now, normally, crop competition should actually be inside that box. But I actually disagree with Weed Smart on this one. I actually believe that crop competition shouldn't be a part of the Big Six. It should be the Big Five. Simply because crop competition should be the way we farm generally. Okay? It shouldn't be a part of an IWM program. It should be the paper that our IWM program is written on. Okay? And if a highly competitive crop is not a negotiable. It's just simply the way we should be cropping. And the reason for that is when we think about weed control on an ecological level, what we're actually doing is trying to tip the balance between the crop and the weed in the crop's favour. And that's the reason why pre-emergent herbicides are so effective, because it takes out those early emergers. The late emergers are at a disadvantage to the already emerged wheat crop. Therefore, crop competition is able to finish the job. So just always remember that that's the game that we're in. We're in a war between the weeds and the crop. It is not about a single tool. It is certainly not about a single product, okay? So today I just wanted to talk about crop competition because it's such a central component of weed control. I wanted to talk about it in relation to canola and also to do with wheat. So this was a set of trials that were generously funded by GRDC. We actually did 12 trials over the West Australian grain belt, looking at things like row spacing, seed size, variety, open pollinated versus hybrid canola, and also seeding rate. And that was an example of one of our sites from the air. So they were pretty large sites, and they were very, very well replicated. And today I'll be talking about the competitive factors for canola, and that'll be obviously what's the effect of variety, seeding rate, row spacing, which growers do not like changing, and also canola seed size on annual ryegrass seed production. So here's some data. What we've done is we've pulled the data together for some of these trials, and what we have here on the vertical axis is annual ryegrass weed seed production. And on the horizontal axis, we have two row spacings, 25 centimetre or 50 centimetre row spacing. We have an open pollinated variety and a hybrid variety. That's Trophy and Thunder. And we have three seeding rates. We have 20 seeds per square metre, 35 seeds per square metre, and 50 seeds per square metre. Now, what do you see from there when it comes to annual ryegrass seed production? Well, the first thing is seeding rate consistently makes a difference, doesn't it? Okay, as you increase your seeding rate for canola, we get far less annual ryegrass seed production. Okay, and this is also this is in the absence of herbicides. Okay, so we're using no herbicides in this situation. We also see that using a hybrid variety, a more vigorous variety, has a modest difference on annual ryegrass seed production, especially at the lower seeding rates. But as you increase seeding rate, it very much takes out that effect. And what do you see about row spacing? Well, I see no difference when it comes to row spacing for canola. And that's simply because it's a very indeterminate species. It'll take up that interrow quickly. Okay, but if you can, sow at a narrow row spacing. However, for canola, it's not necessarily that important. And as we look at the canola yield for this trial, one thing I wanted to highlight is that as we increase our canola seeding rate, we are not foregoing yield. Okay, so on every single situation, whether it be herbicide applied, every time we have herbicide applied, we are basically not losing yield for increasing as we increase our seeding rate. But when we don't apply any herbicide in a weedy situation, we actually get quite reasonable increases in crop yield. Okay, so canola competition plays a central part in our ongoing weed control effort, and increasing seeding rate is certainly not going to penalise you in that. Okay. So what about seed size? So this was a range of trials where we actually had the three standard seeding rates again, and as you can see, there is a decrease in the annual ryegrass seed production as we increase our seeding rate. We have our open pollinated variety and our hybrid variety, and we have small seeds. What I did was I graded it down to less than 1.8 millimetres in diameter and larger than 2 millimetres in diameter. So not a huge difference, but still a difference. And what we found was not a massive difference, okay? A modest difference, especially at the low seeding rate for large seed, but not a massive difference when it comes to seed size, okay? So seed size is not necessarily going to affect us too much there. So as a take-home message, when we're thinking about improving our competitiveness for canola, variety is important. A nice big hybrid is going to help you out an awful lot there. Okay, and we used a fairly modest hybrid there, but there's far bigger ones. Seeding rate is an absolutely massive win for canola. Okay, it's a very uncompetitive species early. It's quite small. It's quite sluggish in its growth early. We need to use up that space. Okay, so seeding rate is very important. Row spacing on its own was not a strong interaction. Okay, so you can go wider rows, say for instance 50 centimetres for canola. However, we did find there was an interaction with seeding rate. So as we went wider, we needed a larger seeding rate to get the same effect. Okay, if we wanted to reduce our seeding rate, we definitely needed to reduce our canola row spacing. And canola seed size did not have an effect on annual ryegrass seed production. However, it did dramatically increase our establishment rates there, so it does have a value. So what about wheat? Okay, I wanted to look at the factors of time of sowing, wheat seeding rate, and our pre-emergent herbicide choice, because there's an awful lot of pre-emergents on the market now. We've been sort of flooded with new options there, and we want to see how that controls annual ryegrass. This was a study where we actually did 9 of these trials across the WA wheat belt, and they were big. They were around 160 plots per site, 4 replicates, so the data was pretty handy. And we replicated that across all of the geographical zones of Western Australia. And what we did in these trials was we actually went to these plots every 2 weeks after the establishment of seeding, and we actually took soil cores from the interrows of some of the plots, and we actually put that soil into a almost like a Chinese food container, sowed susceptible annual ryegrass on it, and actually saw how much ryegrass we had growing. So what we have there is we have annual ryegrass shoot length, and we have the time after seeding, right? And what we basically want is the smaller the annual ryegrass shoot length, the more herbicide that's still available or still active for us. And what we find here is that herbicides are not just herbicides, okay? So when we see products like our pink line, which is trifluralin, Boxer Gold here in the black, what we find is those products don't last that long in the soil. They're not that residual. However, we've got products such as Matino Complete, Overwatch, Sakura, that actually last an awful lot longer in our farming system, okay? So we might need to think about the way that we apply these products, whether we dry sow or delay sow. So that's when we dry sow, that's in the dry sowing treatments, and that's in the delayed seeding treatments, and you'll see the similar response there, and that was about 4 weeks after this one. So remember, herbicides operate quite differently. Trifluralin and Boxer Gold, they're not particularly residual. Overwatch, Sakura and Matino Complete are far, far more residual. Even with the delayed seeding, we're getting very good activity right up to 14 weeks after seeding. And this is the data. As we pulled the results from all these 9 sites, this is what we get. So here we got annual ryegrass seed production. We have our herbicides. We have a nil plot where no herbicide was applied at all. Boxer Gold, Trifluralin, Luxamax, Overwatch, Matino Complete and Sakura. And we have 3 seeding rates, being 100 plants per square metre, 150 and 200. And then within there, we also have dry seeding and delayed seeding. Okay, can you follow that okay? There was a lot of interactions in this study. Now, what do we see? As we increase our seeding rate, we have a corresponding decrease in our ryegrass seed production. Seeding rate matters. And it's especially important on products that are relatively weak or not as residual. Things like Boxer Gold and Trifluralin, we find that seeding rate greatly reduces the seed production, even when we're using weaker, less residual products. What we also find is that the products such as Sakura, Matino Complete and Overwatch, they consistently result in far less annual ryegrass, so they're far more residual. That's the reason why their Trifluralin and Sakura mixes in Western Australia are so good. And as we increase our seeding rate, they do even better. But interestingly, what we also find is that when we delay seeding, or this is what you would expect, when you delay seeding and you do get a knockdown, a glyphosate knockdown, you do get less annual ryegrass in the crop, simply because you've reduced some of the germinable seed bank out. However, as we go to high seeding rates and we use a more residual herbicide product, we actually find that dry seeding without a knockdown actually gives us a better result than waiting for a knockdown. Now, this is really, really good news because we have yield benefits from doing that. But if you're going to go dry and you're going to dry sow into a weedy field, you want to use quite a residual product and also bump your seeding rate up to the max if possible. So what we actually find with wheat as well is as we increase our seeding rate, we don't necessarily lose out on yield. Okay, so where we're applying herbicides here, so this is dry sown and that's delayed sown, that's our herbicides and that's our yield. There's only one situation where we get a reduction in yield consistently from increasing our seeding rate, and that was after Boxer Gold. And that's simply because Boxer Gold was a relatively weak product, and we actually said we had a lot of ryegrass in those plots. So we had a lot of interplant competition going on. However, Boxer Gold, when we've had a knockdown, we've taken out a lot of the germinable seed bank, we get a massive increase in yield, simply because the crop is able to get over the top of what's there, of that lower density of weeds, and we're able to get a better crop out of it. So crop competition matters. It's a real central component to everything we do in cropping, and it should never be overlooked at all. So our takeaway for the wheat is that when we look at time of seeding, yes, dry sowing can be beneficial. However, you have to use more residual herbicide and you have to bump your seeding rate up. If you're not going to do that, don't do it. Seeding rate, again, is a massive tick. Bump your seeding rate up. Keep going, okay? The disease people here are going to hate me for saying it, but it really does make a big difference for annual ryegrass seed production. And pre-emergent herbicide choice is also very, very important. So it's horses for courses. If we're going to delay sow, we can actually potentially get away with a less residual product. If you're going to dry sow, you really need that residual capacity within your pre-emergent herbicide choice. So in conclusion, okay, just remember that weed control is a system. It's not just an individual product that we're going to apply. Okay, I want you to think about weed control as being like the loser's game. All right? So where the mistakes or the omissions that you make actually dictate your outcome. Okay, don't be like me with my tennis. Don't try to be a hero and leave out the easy things. Just remember you've got everything tied away beautifully. Excellent crop competition should always be the basis of our cropping, and it's the way we should be doing it. When we look at canola competitiveness, it's affected by variety, seeding rate, and likely time of sowing. Okay, we didn't test that in there, but time of sowing is always very, very good for canola. It's less affected by row spacing and seed size. However, it's always best to optimise everything where you can. To optimise weed control in wheat, it's affected by herbicide choice, increasing your wheat seeding rate as high as you practically can, and selecting a competitive cultivar, which is actually a very, very important thing. And we have vast differences in the competitiveness of cultivars, and I'd love for us to be able to make better decisions in that area. Seeding early can improve ryegrass control, but always choose a highly residual herbicide and increase your seeding rate when you're going to do it. That's absolutely vital for the system. And yield penalties for delayed seeding are real. So I'll just quickly go back. You see the differences in yield between dry sown and delayed sown. They are absolutely real, okay? So always, whatever you can do, maintain a low seed bank in your field. Okay? Low seed banks give you choices. They give you the opportunity to take advantage of an opportunity when it comes along. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mike. Open to questions from the floor.
Thanks, Mike. Great presentation, and love the tennis analogy. I'm also an antique tennis player. Sue Knight's
we must have a game. See if you can kick my butt.
Sue Knight's from GRDC's Ground Cover magazine. Lots of questions. Firstly, have you looked at the economics of putting these sorts of practices in place in terms of, seed costs versus, savings in herbicides? And then also you touched on the consequence with disease management, with competitive crops and bigger canopies. What are the consequences going to be there too?
So when it comes to the economics, I'm a firm believer in that. We've actually got quite a lot of data. And I've actually been engaging with our ag econs people downstairs on that. So yeah, I think it's really, really important. And I think it's a central tenet of AHRI when we come out with recommendations that numbers are very much put with it. And when it comes to disease, you know, we've got trials like this that I think should be multidisciplinary. We should have people run, you know, someone like Fran, crawling all over it, having a bit of a look, seeing what's going on. You know, sclerotinia with the canola. You know, your leaf diseases for the wheat. I'm a very, very firm believer of that, and I think there's a great opportunity to optimise what comes out of these projects, because there's a lot of work in them. They're big.
Paul?
Oh.
Not so much a question, Mike, but first of all, yeah, thanks for the presentation, great. And I guess just following on from what Sue said, I can't speak from a fungicide perspective, but certainly from an entomological perspective, for a long time we've been lamenting the fact that seeding rates are quite low. And from a crop establishment perspective, it is actually a real, I think, impediment to insect pest management, because, you know, we don't have much of a threshold to lose emerging seedlings, particularly a canola.
Especially in canola.
And so I guess from an entomological perspective, I'd certainly be advocating increasing seeding rates if it's going to be providing benefits from a ryegrass perspective. I think in most instances, from a pest perspective, I think we'll also see advantages, recognising, of course, the economics that Sue mentioned. So I guess I'll just give you a plug for the increasing seeding rate.
I completely agree with you, because sometimes we are walking a very fine line, and there's not a lot of opportunity for loss there until we start becoming very uncompetitive, and then yield drops off. Because in the end of the day, what we're trying to do is utilise all the resources. And if there's not a plant there, a weed's going to take its place. It's all about ecology. It's all about the dynamics between utilising resources, and someone's going to utilise those resources.
We'll have one final question over here.
Thank you. Also following up on the economics, you're saying increasing the seeding rate is definitely a good thing to do for the competitivity? Oh, shit. Is that the same with canola when you compare the hybrids and the open pollinated, where seed prices are quite different?
As you could see there, even with the open pollinated lines, okay, we got excellent weed control outcomes from increasing the seeding rate of an OP. It almost matches. Absolutely, absolutely. And I wouldn't go out and recommend someone use a very, very expensive hybrid at 50 plants per square metre. It's a very, very concerning thing. But, you know, even if a grower wanted to sort of rotate with an OP, for instance, or, you know, optimising, you know, because there is a varietal interaction there. Some of those hybrids are very, very big. So the seeding rate may be able to go down when that plant has that much biomass to it. I don't have those numbers, no, but I know that Jackie Bacat at Department of Agriculture in Western Australia actually did quite a lot of those numbers. Yeah.
I promised one more question, but we can go another one. This is the last one.
Yep, great job, Mike. I guess part of my Weed Smart role, I'm very passionate about crop competition, but I've had some really great discussion with the New South Wales agronomist, and he hasn't been anti-crop competition. He'd probably love to see it tweaked a little bit, because up in his area they have very hot, very quick finishes, and he said yes, that early crop competition without a doubt is always there, but if they tip their sowing rates too far, like there's a real fall off at the end of the season. So I thought that was a really relevant point. You know, just to know your local region and perhaps know your local optimal plant densities. Yeah. So just a tweak. Excuse me, just a tweak on it.
Absolutely, I completely agree with you. So obviously there is, as we increase seeding rate, we go up in potential yield, but as we go too far, we can drop off, and that is regional and specific. Okay. Interestingly, when you're at quite a low level, you actually get a lot of biomass and water use per plant, because there's a lot more tillering that goes on, and there's a reduction in tillers later as the plant's trying to hold on to them. So, you know, it's a bit of a catch-22, but yeah, it definitely requires fine-tuning for your region and your farming system, because how much stored water you have, whether you're coming off a fallow, the decision's going to change differently to whether you're coming off a very, very water-intensive crop.
Thank you very much, Mike. Ladies and gentlemen, could you all join me in a round of applause to thank Mike? Thank you.